Good evening. Let's call the meeting to order for the Housing Planning and Development Committee for Monday, May 22nd. We've got in front of our, tonight's agenda is a proposed ordinance, but we've also got some minutes to dispose of, which I'd like to do. Let me just make sure regarding the minutes that if I could ask, just as an aside to the council staff, the version of the minutes on tonight's docket reflects the changes we discussed. I had a couple of typographical corrections. Okay, so I'd like to move that we approve the minutes from our most recent housing planning and development hearing.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. So the main business tonight is our consideration of proposed ordinance 10-2023, an ordinance to establish a new Chapter 781 automobile business operations in Lakewood codified ordinances to establish regulations for automobile-related businesses within the city of Lakewood. It's on first reading. Now tonight, what I'd like to do is have a discussion. We have 4 members of the public signed in to speak. We certainly want to hear from members of the public. It's possible that more will walk in during the meeting, and we want to give everybody an opportunity. Do we have more sign-in sheets on the side? So members of the public, if you want to speak, I've got 4 people signed in to speak, and we'll make sure that we hear from you. If anybody hasn't had a chance to sign in, there's going to be an additional sheet over there. And when we get to that portion of the meeting, the tradition is that we say our name and address for the record and then proceed. But tonight, we also want council members to have a chance to ask their questions. On our committee itself is, the committee members themselves are Council Vice President Keppel, Councilman Schachtner, and me, but we're going to work in a collegial manner, so all members present. We've also got the administration here, and I know that the law department, whom I'd like to call in a moment, has done some work. It sounds as if the mayor's office and the law department has had a chance to talk with a number of automobile-related businesses since since this was proposed a couple Mondays ago, and we've got a potential major revision to the proposal tonight. So, council members, would it be agreeable to, or committee members, I should say, would it be agreeable to open by substituting, or at least considering, if we didn't want to start by substituting, the version that the administration, or the law department rather, has workshopped as a starting point for tonight's discussion? I would be comfortable doing that, but this is the first time we're having a chance to do so. What's on the notice tonight is the original version, not the substitute version. So what we would need to do is consider whether we want to start there, and secondly, make sure that we're displaying it on screen so that members of the public can see what we're seeing. Any commentary, Mr. Schachtner?
Yeah, I'll move to substitute the latest version. I believe that's the one everybody's working from at this point, and had a lot of significant revisions. So just so everyone's on the same page, I would move to substitute so we're not confusing everybody.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
And the ayes have it. So the substitute version is this displayed on screen. And if the council vice president's got the display, could you scroll through as we proceed through so that everyone, actually, I don't know that that's the, yeah, we'll get on the, pardon? Okay. Let me get a clarification. So, Clerk Bach, I do see in the agenda in Granicus 1023 and then proposed substitute automobile repair facilities from May 19. Is the May 19 version the one we just, that's the version that we're looking for, correct? Okay. Can you access that, Councilwoman? You may just need a refresh. Okay. So for those watching, what we're trying to do is update what we're discussing tonight to incorporate some changes. So thanks for bearing with us on the electronic document management. Very, very good. Yes. All right. Okay, council members, would you like to ask any questions at the beginning or indicate any questions that you have? Feel free to do so now. We can also hold those for a little bit later. I'd like to ask the law department or the mayor to frame up the changes in this proposed version. But go ahead, Councilman.
Just real quick. Just at first glance, it is certainly improved upon, and I could see that it has taken into account some people's concerns, just especially in the definition of controlled vehicle, which seems to be what the city is trying to regulate here, and it excludes from the definition of controlled vehicle one that is dropped off by a third-party towing service after the close of business. So that'll solve that at least one issue that we heard last time this legislation came up, is that some of these guys don't have really much control over when the tow companies come and drop things off. So we're not going to blame them for other people's actions there. But I'm interested to hear the rationale for the changes, how it's taken into account the comments from the community and the business community, and what the thought process is. And I'm interested to hear from everybody else to see if this has addressed any of their concerns with it.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Schechter. Any other comments, members? Okay, hearing none. Why don't Mayor or Law Director, would you like to describe what's on screen in front of us and in the version that's on the agenda tonight that has now been substituted?
The podium.
Yes, absolutely. Please approach the podium. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of council. The original ordinance was presented to council at the May 1 meeting, and it was referred to committee then. There was no second reading at the May 15th council meeting. The second reading was deferred pending this committee meeting. That system was at the request of industry participants who requested that we refrain from the second reading until we have time for this committee. And we listened, and that made sense to us, and we made the request to council, and you acceded to that request, which takes us to the input from industry and affected individuals with respect to this proposed regulation. We heard at the council meeting many comments from industry participants. Since that original May 1 council meeting, the administration has met on separate occasions with groups of industry participants to get their good faith comments. We received them and we took them under consideration, and they were valuable to us. The mayor and her administration listened to those comments and incorporated many of them into the new proposed ordinance that we have presented and that you will be discussing here today. For example, Councilman Schachter already mentioned one. The controlled vehicle excludes vehicles left after hours by a third-party towing service or a customer. That was in response to a good faith comment of an industry participant about how do we control for that. That's out of our control. We listened, that made sense, and we addressed it. There was a comment about unlicensed vehicles. One of the participants serviced many fleet vehicles and indicated that was overly cumbersome, difficult to comply with. We listened. We removed that restriction on the unlicensed vehicles. Many of the participants were concerned about the spacing of the lines being legislated. We listened, we deliberated, and decided to remove any restriction on the distancing of the lines. It's up to the industry to know how they can get in and out of their customers' vehicles. That made sense to us. Those were good faith comments. We listened and addressed it. We received comments about used parts on the lot. We learned about the concept of tires, and we realized that it made no sense for us to have a blanket prohibition about parts on the lot, at least in the proposed ordinance, as long as those parts are ready for pickup in an enclosed, fenced, walled-off area or bin outside of the viewing public, outside of the site of the right-of-ways for the public. Again, that was an accommodation that the administration made in this proposal because we believed it made sense. We responded to the concept of how many days we could require a vehicle to be on the lot before it be repaired. Very important comment about supply chain on parts, how difficult it is to get parts. Made good sense to us. It was not critical to the regulation. It was ancillary, and so that restriction was removed. Finally, and these are examples, there are probably more, but finally we heard a comment about the necessity or not necessity for jail and the difficulties of a jail sentence. We deliberated on that. We want this ordinance to have teeth. The administration does. It's important to the people. It's important to the residents and the commercial districts. But we ultimately propose to you no jail, a no jail penalty for a violation. The violation now is proposed to be a misdemeanor, unclassified misdemeanor that does not allow for any jail. It's just a financial penalty and community service. So what we propose to you this evening for your deliberation, we believe is a very informed and focused piece of legislation. It reflects an incremental approach to this very serious problem. We believe it appropriately balances the interests of the community and the industry. We're grateful for the comments of the industry. The mayor and her team are very grateful that the industry came forward and helped us draft meaningful and focused legislation. And I'll address any questions this council has. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Vargo. Administration, any other comments, or do you want to go through the law director? Okay, thank you. Council members, Councilwoman Keppel, beginning with you.
Just briefly, just a comment to the council clerks, if I can. The document isn't showing up on the live stream. I don't know if there's something we can do about that.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, just wanted to make sure that.
Sure. Councilwoman, do you want to comment on the proposed substitute ordinance or some of the narrative from the director? You don't have to. Okay, that's fine. Councilman Schachtner.
Just one question, and I'm sure I'll have more, but this one comes to mind now. In terms of the penalty, I'm going to presume that the person responsible would be whoever's name is on the permit. Is that how you're deciding who's going to be serving the community service?
That is correct. Well, it would be, the name on the permit is going to be the operator. We will look for the owner of the operator. Yeah.
But what if, would a LLC, would it be able to, an LLC be able to get the permit under the name of the LLC?
Well, yes. An LLC can get the permit. If there's a violation, the penalty will be paid, the financial penalty will be paid by the LLC.
Mm-hmm.
Community service is a different issue, and perhaps on a case-by-case, we'll look at it, or maybe we'll refine it going in. But the financial penalty will be paid by the entity on the permit, including a corporate entity.
Okay.
And I think you raise a good point about some of the challenges of a jail sentence in that regard anyway, because if you have a corporate entity, you have that very important issue. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. That's all for now.
Thanks, Mr. Schachtner. I know we have questions here, but not give due attention to this end of the dais. I want to make sure that Councilwoman Marks. Okay, no comments at the moment. Mr. Rader.
Thank you. Just a few quick questions. A few members of the public came and spoke about performing some quick things in the parking lot, like swapping out batteries, replacing windshield wipers. I see some of the language changed, but there's still a section, no, my computer went to sleep. Has readily accessible building capacity to perform all repairs and services within enclosed structure. Does that mean that those services have to be performed now within the
No.
structure? Okay.
I'm sorry.
Please, go ahead.
Sir. Thank you for that question. Again, we started out with the prohibition. We listened to those comments. Those were valuable. Nobody, it was never the intent to make illegal changing a windshield wiper out on the lot. Wasn't the intent. That was an unintended consequence brought to our attention by the industry again, which we're grateful for. So what we've done now, we have put it in the permitting section, as you see, councilperson, and the permitting section says that during the inspection, the inspector will have to verify that the entity has the physical capacity to perform all repairs. What's that? If the entity does, that is telling the city the capacity is there, the intent is there. And if there's a one-off employee, a one-off emergency customer that has to have something done briefly in the lot, that will be outside the enforcement mechanism. It's not our intent to regulate that. We want to regulate your capacity to do it, your intent to do it, that you don't intend to have major repairs out in the lot, and you don't intend to do all your repairs out in the lot. We're not going to prohibit a one-off as long as we see you have open bays and the ability and the capacity to perform. We're going to assume you're a rational business and you want to perform in your bays.
Good, well, thank you. I got my battery checked at AutoZone the other day. I don't want to be a hypocrite, so thank you for that, because that makes perfect sense. Those things should certainly be allowed, especially if it can keep, customers churning and things like that. So I appreciate that attention to detail moving into that section. That makes sense to me, that portion at least. My only other question was if a purveyor has an agreement with an adjoining property or some other lot somewhere else in the city, it's a private lot, that's where they keep their cars. I know there are at least a couple of automobile-related businesses here in town that have even two properties, or maybe have an agreement with an adjacent property to park vehicles. Is that permissible under this ordinance? Does it affect those businesses in any way?
It could be permissible as long as that qualifies as an accessory lot under the Lakewood ordinance. There is ordinance provisions that deals with that type of lot. Planning knows that, and if that is complied with, then that lot can be used. But there is a compliance process within a different section of the ordinance dealing with accessory parking.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Rader. A quick follow-on. An auto supply, definitional question, is an auto supply store such as an AutoZone, does that type of business meet the definition of automobile business operation, which maybe we could scroll up to display at the bottom of the first page? Because it may not. It says,
Yeah.
any business that rents, leases, or sells motor vehicles or repairs, services, or repossesses motor vehicles. A supply store is something different, I would argue.
And that would be a valid argument. I can tell you that's what litigation's all about, arguments. You have the better argument. You have the far better argument. But somebody would say, well, is changing a battery a repair? Is it technically within it? So therefore, we needed, instead of excluding an entity or struggling to be so precise in definition, we are essentially excluding the one-off battery change, the one-off windshield wiper. That's not our intent. Our
Understood,
intent
yeah.
is major repairs be done inside, and the operator reflect an intent to do the repairs inside.
Okay, and we're counsel to proceed forward with this ordinance or version thereof, and it came to pass that the building department, as conceived in this version of the draft, would publish a form and then give a certain time frame for compliance. Would we clarify through an administrative process that the Georgia administration, directs and manages, would we clarify all such detailed questions such as that? Let's say we were to pass this with no changes tonight. This edge case question, is AutoZone in or out? Before the law were to become effective, shouldn't we pin that down? We could do it in the ordinance, but if we don't, is there administrative means by which you would clarify that?
Well, we can do additional means, but the most effective means is going to be the inspector is not going to AutoZone. The inspector is going to go to the car leasing operations, the car sales, the car repairs. We don't view AutoZone as one of those. So there will be no inspection of that. And that is an administrative procedure by initiative, by how we're rolling this out, which would give all the information to the public that it would need.
Yeah, and that's my point really, is if we do get clarity, if we're to, come to this eventuality, that is just clear up front in the public. For that matter, I have bought windshield wipers at Drug Mart and struggled to figure out how to clip it on, but eventually I did it. It's Drug Mart, because they have one aisle of auto supplies, categorized. Again, I would argue not, but it's a good question, and if other council members or administration have comments on that, I'd be curious to hear. Councilman Baker, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Director Vargo. Digging into this, I thank you for the work you've done. It's clear you worked with a lot of the operators. I'm interested to hear later today in public comment. I know we have a lot of them here, kind of what their thoughts are as well. One thing I was curious about is one of the sections says, park or store any controlled vehicle on a public street or alley. I do wonder if there is a little nuance here, just being practical from a perspective of, let's say they're moving cars around and they have to leave it on it. So is there any way we could say like overnight or something like that, or past midnight, or I don't know, because the notion that they would pull something out, leave it there for 20 minutes and go get a different car and kind of switch them around, I don't want to pass something that isn't practically something that can be accomplished. Okay. So I would just, ask for the consideration of my colleagues on that point. And then secondly, I have great faith in our housing and building department. They typically are inspecting residential homes, residential construction, some commercial construction. We just hired someone to do commercial inspections. What sort of training are we planning for our housing and building folks to, there's a little bit of leeway here, provide sufficient parking, stores and maintains parts in a safe manner, and has readily accessible building capacity. How are we making those determinations? Are there standards in the industry that we're relying on? Are we training our staff? Some of the things I just would be curious about.
That will be rolled out. There will be training information for the inspectors. 2 quick points. This ordinance is on its terms to take effect January of 2024. So the rollout procedurally will continue, including appropriate instruction and training for the inspectors.
And I guess, are there, if I may, Mr. Chair, I'm wondering if, and this is where I want to, try to be as business friendly as possible as we talk about this, and perhaps the businesses in the audience have, I know most industries have, there's ASTM standards or whatever, that can provide really good safety procedures or whatever. And I'm not in the automotive repair industry, but I'm curious if there is one and it's acceptable to the administration and council and some of the operators, is that something we can put into the statute so at least there's like a guiding light? Because some of it could be an inspector says, well, I don't think you have sufficient parking. Well, why? Because I don't think you have sufficient parking. So I'd like it to be grounded in kind of industry specific, normal business, rather than an inspector's opinion that may or may not be informed in the industry.
Thanks, Mr. Baker. I'd like to reply to one. So let me share a couple things. First, tonight, I don't necessarily envision that the committee will complete its work. I think we're considering for the first time major revisions. If we can complete our work, that's great, but we also have time. We are on first reading. The earliest that a potential third reading would happen would be the second meeting of June. So I strongly, well, I'm inclined to allow ourselves time. We also haven't had the chance yet to hear from some of the public here, and we're going to use up our time quickly. So that's one indicator. Number two, my perspective on this is that this is a good proposal, and that I'd like to refine it and improve it with the full benefit of public discussion in all directions. But I view this as something that is strong and ought to become part of our ordinances for a number of important reasons. So I approach it with that spirit. I'm going to ask one refining question, but also like to reply on the question of parking on street. You know, for de minimis or temporary, for example, as the councilman raised that question. It's a good question. What I think should not happen is that businesses would routinely and chronically tie up public parking that is designed to be available to all members of the public, whether a visitor, a shopper, an employee, a patron of another business. And so I don't want there to be gamesmanship available to any party left in the ambiguous wording of an ordinance. So we could include, hypothetically, routine and continuous and chronic, but then that's going to become a battle over what those words mean. Do those words apply in this or that case? You know, what I would envision would be that, in practical terms, if there's a good faith, temporary use that's occasional in the scenario you described, that the strong likelihood is that the city is not going to be enforcing in that case. It rather would be, the scenario would be that there's insufficient off-street capacity given the volume of customers, given the volume of controlled vehicles under that business's control at any given time, that they can't do their routine business on premises. And I want to hear your response, but a Lakewood automotive repair business that I have used for years has a tiny number of off-street parking spaces, 4 or 5. That business is never out of capacity because they just get the cars in and out. They make the repairs and then you're done. And if they don't have capacity to take control of the vehicle, they say, well, don't bring it today, don't bring it tomorrow, I've got time for you next Tuesday. That's how they manage it. So they're very successful, even though the off-street parking capacity is tiny compared to a lot. So I would hope that we're able to successfully define this with the feedback, the continuing feedback. We took a first step today, but there's, I'm sure, more dialogue to have with automotive business operators. That was a long response by me. Councilman Baker.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate you know, the analysis. And I think from my perspective, the intent of this legislation, at least as it's described by the law director and the administration, and as we've talked about it, is that basically the businesses be able to, on their lot, support, at the end of the day when they're done with business, the cars are there. The controlled vehicles are on their lot. In this instance, I think that's, you know, we can very clearly say at midnight or, you know, at the close of business or whatever, you know, all those controlled vehicles be on your lot or in a lot that you control. And that's my only, you know, I think there is a way to be very clear about it, so to not allow exceptions that people can drive Mack trucks through.
Okay, so I welcome your observations and your thoughts, and perhaps on the backside of this meeting we can get some of your proposals in writing. I would also like to say, you know, so this proposal does not contemplate having police enforcement. Now, police do and have the ability, it's really our parking division, it's not a criminal patrol, it's our parking division, the ability today to enforce on-street parking violations. But the practical matter is that in every street in Lakewood, whether we're talking residential streets or major commercial corridors, the capacity for timely enforcement isn't as great as it might be desired from a customer's perspective. If I'm driving around and I can never get to my favorite restaurant or the dry cleaner, I can call in to the police, and the police will respond, and the ticket may be issued for $25. But as a practical matter, I don't have access to where I'm trying to go. And if this happens on a continuous basis, that's the tool. If I'm not in a metered spot, the same situation, it's a 24-hour check on a residential street, and the reality is that our police have priority 1 and 2 calls to go to, and chronic parking is priority 3. That means the police will get there when they can get there. They're going to follow due process, and so they don't chalk tires, and to be able to check whether a vehicle has been there in excess of 24 hours really means they're going to have more than 24 hours, probably 48 or 72 hours before the police ticket. And only when it's after a ticket would a tow happen. So our current parking ordinances that are enforced by the police don't offer a practical remediation. They don't abate the condition of public parking being tied up. They can result in a fine, but, and this is not a criticism, I think this is a reality that most cities contend with, because you can't police your way only into parking management. Mayor, did you want to make a comment?
I guess in response to Councilman Baker's comment about the intent being the overnight parking. In fact, it's the during the day and the overnight parking. We want to make sure that our public spaces are available for both residents and businesses during the day. You know, I'll give an example. When we passed a couple years ago the food truck park, it was very important to make sure that the food trucks were not parked in public spaces. Again, the same kind of thought process there is that we're not allowing a business to use public spaces continuously to support their business. So that's just an example, but I wanted to make that clarification that the intent is for, 24/7, that public spaces should be available to the public to utilize.
Thanks, Mayor. Councilman Shackner?
Thank you, Chair. Just a few questions that came up as people were talking. I think we understand how, this is going to be enforced. It's going to be enforced by neighboring businesses or neighboring residents that have previous complained or are still concerned about the issue, calling whenever they see. And I think we all have experience with issues in our own community, in our own wards, when there's a problem house or a problem neighbor, that every single time that they could call somebody on something, they will call. So to rely on it's not like we're going to have roving building inspectors around checking every 2 seconds. Well, I can assure you that the neighboring business or resident will let you know, or let the city know when something's happening. And I have no issue with legislation not specifically enumerating every single possible externality or possibility. That messes with how you can actually enforce or administer the entire program. But we're talking about when the ordinance says that you have to have capacity, though, or accessible building capacity to perform all repairs and services within enclosed building structure. It doesn't say you have to be performing the repairs in an enclosed building structure. So as the way it's written, that if somebody calls hey, they're doing, and it doesn't define major repair or minor repair. If someone calls, they're doing repair not in the building, say, well, that's not against the chapter. It just says you have the capacity to do it. And so I guess my point here is that I would expect that a lot of how this ordinance would be carried out is through rules and regulations done on the administrative level in building and housing. But I think I would be more comfortable seeing at least an attempt or a draft of what those definitions or rules and regulations are going to be on the building and housing side. Because I'm fine with general language as long as I know the administering of it is going to be. And again, I don't want to step out my role. I'm a councilman. I'm not the administration. It's your prerogative how you want to administer ordinances, but I'm just saying, I think it would have better comfort in an ordinance that isn't entirely prescriptive in knowing what the actual day-to-day administering is going to be. I think that's all I wrote down.
Thanks, Councilman. So in other words, you're speaking of an important point, which is where does the detail come? Does it come in the proposed ordinance? Does it come in the follow-up to the ordinance in the administrative guidelines and the enforcement procedures? And it sounds like you're comfortable either way, but you'd like to, before we consider any final action.
Oh, yeah, and there's a lot of runway with this ordinance. I mean, it's set to take effect January 1st anyway, so there's not necessarily a hurry to get it on the books, because it's not going to be on the books anyway until the 1st. So, and I think it would be fair, I think, for everybody involved, the residents, neighboring businesses, the people in the auto repair industry, to know exactly what they're dealing with, instead of saying, like, this is what this statute says, and then years down the line to say, oh, well, we're administering it this way, and people had different expectations. That's it.
Yeah, I certainly agree, and so we should work through that. Director Vargo, the effective date, where is, Councilman Schachner said January 1st. Is that listed somewhere?
It is.
In the preamble.
It's listed in the ordinance.
Okay. So does that preamble have legal effect, or does that need to be included in Section 2 or a new Section 3? Okay.
Well, yes, yeah, it will not be effective until that date.
Okay, so including the effective date in the preamble would
Should be
take care of that.
sufficient.
Okay.
I'll give you
Okay.
an absolute answer.
Thank you.
This week.
And then I have one potential wordsmithing, potential change, which would be in at the last page on 781.06D, an automobile business operation that was operating as business prior to the denial of a permit renewal application. I think, if I'm reading this correctly, it should read denial of a insert permit or permit renewal application, and then consider the rest. But maybe we could, we could clarify that at a future moment in time. So that's all I had. We have some public comment. Did everybody have a chance who wants to make public comment to sign in? If not, please do. What's that? Is there one more? Okay, or two more? Let's start. So on time.
Thank you. I'll take my seat. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Vargo. We've got 14 minutes. The chair of the next committee is immediately to my left, your right. I don't know how much indulgence I can ask for in terms of, this was, first of all, thank you, everybody, for the good discussion. This was important to have this time and focus. But let's get rolling on the public comment. First is Charles Kalani. Please join us. And since we're a little short on time, if we could shoot for 2 minutes, 3 minutes at the most.
I planned for 5, but I'll do the best I can here. I've got some
Thank you.
additional stuff that I wrote down.
Could you state your name and address for the record?
Charlie Kalani, 13728 Madison Avenue.
Welcome.
First of all, I just want to start by saying that I appreciate that most of our concerns were heard and remedied after our last discussion. I am, however, still trying to understand this notion, and Madam Mayor, maybe you can address this to me later on or give me a call at some time. but I don't understand this notion that our businesses, that is not part of the public, but all other businesses are. That still, that was said during the first initial meeting, and that still doesn't make any sense to me. But unfortunately, some of the most troubling issues still remain from the original ordinance. For example, this permit scheme. While I do appreciate the concessions made regarding the storing of items so that they're out of public view, I cannot stress enough the problems I have with the idea that city officials will have unfettered access to our properties and that our livelihoods hinge on a city employee's arbitrary interpretation of if we have enough, quote, readily accessible building capacity before they give us a permit to continue to operate our existing legal business. Some of who have been in existence for over 50 years. I believe between all the businesses in Lakewood, bars, restaurants, and automotive repair garages are probably the longest running businesses in the city. Who defines this regarding the accessible building capacity? I'm also troubled by the notion that they can request, or what sounds like to me, demand from us any information they wish regarding complaints, violations, and other items pertaining to this ordinance. And among other things, if I don't give them the information that they ask for, that is grounds for permit denial. The government can't come into any of your guys' houses and your guys' property and demand that you hand over papers without a warrant. Why should that be any different for me? The Fourth Amendment reads the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. And as far as I can tell, that's exactly what this sounds like regarding both the inspection and other issues. Once again, I see the part, and I apologize if I'm reading into something that one of you guys already talked about. I see the part about not parking in front of garage doors or entranceways is still in there. We need to be able to use our parking areas the way we see fit. As I explained in the past, this is a huge problem for us regarding the security and theft of services. Garage doors need to be able to be blocked. Small jobs need to be able to be performed on an as-needed basis in front of bay doors, and vehicles at risk for theft need to be able to be blocked in. These are the facts of running any automotive repair business. Under the definition provided, as far as I can tell, with the fact that AutoZone installs, going back to what you said before, AutoZone installs batteries, AutoZone installs headlight bulbs, windshield wipers, they advertise it as a core part of their business. So as far as I'm concerned, I do believe that they would fall underneath the way this is written. There is still the issue of on-street parking. While I can certainly understand the need to balance the issue of parking, I do not understand where or how it was reasoned that generally attacking automotive-related business, neighborhood businesses is supposed to remedy this. I don't know of any studies that were done or if this is just complaint-driven. Are there only parking problems around automotive-related businesses? Of course not. Where Big Boy and Radio Shack used to be is a massive parking problem, and part of that, going back to what I said the first time, has to do with the way the city arranged the parking spaces. They took where you could pull in 3 vehicles on Detroit Road there and turned it into one sideways parking space instead of being able to pull 3 vehicles in when they reconstructed that area. Apparently, the implication here, though, is that there will never be a parking problem in Lakewood again if our customers' vehicles are restricted from public use. As I said, we are a neighborhood business. That means many of our customers live in the surrounding areas. That means it is perfectly necessary, common, and within our rights to have to walk a couple intersections over or travel halfway down the block to pick up a customer's car that may be parked on the street because they may live in the area or in an apartment building that doesn't have off-street parking. How will this be enforced, and who will enforce it? Will we be under constant 24/7 surveillance? Will police officers' precious time be used to run license plates on a suspected customer's vehicle to see where they live, and then that owner be called to ask why their car is parked there? What qualifies as a legitimate complaint? This sounds like it's going to be a he said, she said basis, and I do not see how this is constitutional or legal. You say that only previously permitted business is allowed to operate under suspension, but only after the appeal has been received by written notice to the building commissioner. So in effect, you will still have the ability to shut down a legitimate legal business for a given amount of time without any due process until the building commissioner acknowledges receipt of an appeal. Then, instead of the appeal going before an impartial third party like a judge, according to this, it will go in front of the planning commission. Who is on the planning commission? I have no idea. I tried to look them up on the city's website, and there's nobody there. What I do know is that the people on the planning commission are appointed by the mayor and city council. Some of the same people who wrote this legislation and have been openly hostile towards some of us in the automotive business. Can I go through my last paragraph, or should I stop?
Can you do it very quickly?
I will
Go
attempt
right
it.
ahead.
Okay. How does that type of operation fall within the bounds of the Fifth and 14th Amendments? It doesn't. What other businesses does the city force to pay a fee to operate? What other businesses does the city demand a yearly operating fee and the relinquishing of private property rights and access to other effects? None. As far as we in the automotive industry is concerned, this entire ordinance is unfair, unnecessary, not in the public interest, will cause us immediate harm, and is wholly unenforceable. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 5 more to go and 7 minutes in the meeting. I hope we can go a little bit late, but next is Brian Gentile. Please join us. And Mr. if I'm saying your name, anybody's name wrong, apologies in advance. Mr. Gentile, please state your name and address for the record. Thanks.
Brian Gentile, 19425 Van Aken Boulevard. The main concern that I have is the one that Councilman Baker brought up, that there's it seems like an awful lot of powers being given to the inspector. I don't really think that it's fair to the business owners to have to comply with whatever the inspector says if they don't know exactly what the standards are. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, sir. Next is Micah, I think, Zaken. Please join us, thank you, and state your name and address for the record, thanks.
My name is Micah Zachem.
Zachem.
I have a property on 15637 through 15635 to 15639 Madison Avenue. Just to add to your comments about the police towing vehicles, we have constant problems at our property, completely unrelated to automotive businesses, of people blocking our driveway. Things do get towed eventually, but the police assign it a low priority, and we have several tenants that live upstairs at the property that can be made late to work or other items, because the police can frequently take an hour or more. For years, I've asked the Department of Housing and Building to put stripes up. They did put one sign, which isn't effective because it's not in a spot that can be seen. I don't want to go too much off topic, but it would be nice to see something like that dealt with as well.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next is Renee Nottage. Please join us and state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Renee Nottage, and me and my husband live at 2159 Morrison. We've been there for a little over 20 years. I'm hoping that the regulations that are being proposed in this ordinance, 10-2023, that target legal auto repair businesses will be applied to private residents that perform repair work on their property. They have several cars on their property. Many of them are unlicensed, although I see you changed that, but this is a personal property. The noise and property value issues that are supposedly being caused by legal businesses are most definitely a factor when the work is being performed by a neighbor where the property is right next to our house. This is an issue we've been dealing with for the last 3 years. We've written letters to our councilmen, police officials, building inspectors, and they were forwarded to the mayor. A building inspector came out and looked at the property and agreed that the work that's being done at the residence is not legal. They have cars that are being brought in, brought out on flatbeds, middle of the night, just, random junk cars. They'll sit in there. They've got about 6 or 7 cars in their backyard. There's a noise issue that we've had for this whole time. loud mufflers. They also play all horribly loud music all times of the day and night. We've called the police, and neighbors have called the police several times about this issue. And since there's an ordinance being proposed that applies to legal car repair shops, I'm hoping that somebody could take a look at the car repair shop that's going on next door to us, so that maybe they would have to get a permit to be able to do the work that they're doing, because it's really a nuisance. And like I said, we've been sent letters. I've got all kinds of stuff here, pictures, talked to the building inspector, talked to our councilman, but nothing has been done in these 3 years about this issue. So that's
Okay,
my
thank you,
two
ma'am. I'm sorry to hear about the neighbor problems. And the description of what you're sharing sounds to me as if that's straight up a violation of the existing rules. I think that there's some narrow circumstances under which private residents can conduct repairs, but it can't be done in the manner you're talking about. And it has to be kept in a orderly manner, not on blocks. While we're at it, there's a property I can think of that for years has had a number of VW buses stacked up next to a
I know
school.
where that is. Yeah.
And that, I'm sure, is not in compliance. So maybe we could work together
Yeah,
after the
if
meeting.
somebody, I mean, this was like, I came here because I figured this kind of applies to that. And since we
does.
haven't been able to get any action any other way, I thought this would be
Okay.
a good place to address it. So,
Thank you for bringing that forward. And I do want to make the distinction, actually, so to correct my own comments, what the resident describes is not a business, it's a private citizen who needs to comply with the rules, and that's something that we can and will respond to. Thank you. Next is Jerry Knapp. Jerry, please join us and state your name and address for the record.
Jerry Knapp Jr., 14588 Madison Avenue. So first off, I'd like to thank the mayor and her staff. She met with me, my brother, and several of our other industry professionals, and we were able to get a lot of the things changed on here. And most of these changes that we've made are pretty much what we're looking for as industry standards. I know we talk about, vehicles getting dropped off and stuff, but that's part of our job, is to be able to manage the inventory on our lot. I work on about 250 cars a month. So I got, 20 cars coming in and out of my lot every day. And I do test drives around the neighborhood. I see every single auto repair shop. I know what's going on. I like to be in touch with the industry. And there are several other businesses in our industry that cannot manage their own lots. And because of that, that parking is affecting our public. We are not public. We are private. We make money off of the public. That is their right to be able to park in those spots. The parking on streets is not going to affect me, and it's not going to affect a lot of my other repair shops in this industry. But I think people need to kind of clean up their acts a lot, and it's starting to affect us, and it's kind of starting to make me mad because, it's imposing more restrictions on me because people can't take care of their own stuff in-house. So I think that, cleaning up your lot is something that we should have to do. You should have to store your parts away. You should have a neat and orderly lot. You should be able to access. And I don't understand why some of these industry professionals want to squander our businesses and make our industry look less professional by not taking care of their in-house stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next is Charlie Kalani, presumably senior. Welcome, and please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name's Charlie Kalani. I work at the business at 13728 Madison Avenue. It's on the corner of Parkwood and Madison. And I've been there over 50 years. The first thing I want to address with Mr. Bullock is he mentioned that when a car is parked for 24 hours and the police come out and chalk the tires or whatever, as far as I know, they usually ticket it right after 24 hours, no matter what happens. I'm not happy with a lot of what's been happening here. As far as the ordinance, I would have thought that the mayor or Mr. Bullock or somebody else would have notified some of the automotive repair garages. We had no clue what was going on. I've been trying to get a hold of my councilman for 2 weeks, and I'm not getting anywhere. But the parking in our area is not a problem before 3 or 4 o'clock during the day. If you come to our area, go 2 blocks either way, you won't find any. You'll find a lot of empty parking spots because things don't really gear up until the afternoon. Restaurants, bars, people coming home. And I can understand the overnight thing. I have no problem with that. In our area, there's a lot of apartments, a lot of businesses, and there isn't very many parking spots, but we still don't seem to have a problem, like I said, during the day. When the restaurants and bars get going, and I don't understand how you can pull one business out, like our business, and charge them and tell them they can't park on the street anymore, and their customers can't park on the street. We've been there for all these years. We've always paid our taxes. Our customers come in. We take care of our customers. And those people spend money in the neighborhood when they come there. They go to the coffee shops. They go to the bars. You know, again, parking's always been a problem in Lakewood for a long time. Most of the automotive shops in Lakewood, the auto repair shops now, have been there since the beginning, since the 20s. Maybe not with the same owners, but we've been there forever. We paid a lot of dues here. And there's problems, but how the problem's going to be solved by pulling the automotive shops out of this and making them, target them, penalize them for a parking problem that's been here for 100 years. I don't understand it. I don't think it can be done. I hope that the city council and the mayor want to work with the businesses as far as them revising the ordinance. Every legislation I've ever seen in my life, they put in all kinds of extra things so they can pull them out later, negotiation purposes. But we need the street parking. We pull the cars off the street at nighttime. So if they're going to take away our street parking, and then they're going to take away our station parking, what's the object? In the past 2 years, they've taken away 6, 8 spots in our area that just caused more problems because we're working with less spots now. I counted the apartments and the businesses between 2 blocks east of us, 3 blocks west of us, and I came up with 180 apartments or businesses, and I'm only counting them as one each. There's a bar, you can't count them as one. A garage, you can't count as one spot. But even with all that, like I said, from 7 o'clock in the morning when I'm there until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there's always plenty of open spots. And there's some people, I think one of the councilmen brought up that some people complain and complain and complain. They believe that the spots in front of their house or the spots in front of their business belong to them. As far as I'm concerned, this is all public parking. And again, we are the public, and our customers are the public, just like the barber shop and the coffee shop and everyone else. So I really don't believe that this is going to help anything. I'm wondering, everywhere there's an automotive business in Lakewood, did they feel, that somebody on city council and the mayor feel that there's a problem everywhere there's an automotive business, whether it's a parts store or a rental place? Another thing, I don't think we have any leasing offices in Lakewood. I don't think we have any sales, car sales in Lakewood. They've been all driven out over the years. So I don't understand why that's in the legislation. And we've had many customers, and we try to take care of the public. We don't deserve to be treated like this. What should be happening here is if there's a certain problem by a certain automotive garage or a parts store, they should be addressed through them. I can tell you from what I've seen on the list of all the automotive businesses, God bless you, all the automotive businesses, I can think of maybe 2 or 3 places where there's actually parking problems. But there's a lot more parking problems with restaurants and bars. I mean, a disaster, just like Angelo's Pizza across the street. You know, I love the guys. They do a good job. They bring a lot of people in the area. But now I'm not going to be allowed to park on the street, and nothing changes with anybody else. That's
Okay.
what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. We've got one more, with your permission, next chair of next committee. Mr. Dave Slife signed in to speak. Mr. Slife, please join us and state your name and address for the record.
Yeah, my name is Dave Slife, 13729 Madison. Excuse me, I'm not a good public speaker. I want to address my area, specifically across from Charlie Kalani Jr. and Sr. I've been there about 14 years, and in those 14 years, that one business, and I can get other businesses to attest, has monopolized parking in our area, not only in the vicinity of his store, the adjoining 2 or 3 blocks as they play Frogger and move cars around day and night. If they would just utilize their own parking lot and not make it a junkyard, and their adjoining business with the junkyard behind it, and move those cars out of there, they would have enough room for all of their customers. They have a 5-car garage with 1 working bay, and most of the work's done in front of that bay because they got to get lawnmowers and garbage out and tire junk and crap everywhere. I see a lot of other car places in the city. I don't see any of them operate like that, and I don't see everybody else having a problem parking. If you ask any of the adjoining businesses, even some if they're afraid to talk to him because he owns their stores, they'll all tell you, Charlie, specifically Kalani Automotive, is our particular parking spot. I'm sorry it's a problem on half the other guys in the city. I used to own a gas station. I never had this problem. We serviced the cars and got them out of there. They get their lot so full up, they have an easement on my property. They have the audacity to park cars on my property and tell me that it's their parking lot too. They have an easement to get cars to the back of their building that is full of vehicles that haven't moved in 3 to 5 years. So unfortunately for everybody else, we have a Kalani problem. I hope it doesn't impact the rest of the city a whole bunch, but it needs to be addressed. The parking problem specifically in our 3 or 4 block area is one entity. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We are at time, and in fact, a little over time. Thank you to the next committee. I'd like to conclude the meeting. Any final comments from the administration? Okay. Then, without objection, well, let me state this. So we're not going to make a motion tonight. Let's keep the legislation in committee. There was a proposed major series of edits and changes. We began discussing that tonight, but I think in the spirit of transparency and fairness, this bringing it back for a future committee session will allow everybody to take an additional look. So we'll plan to come back in committee at some point. We don't have it on the calendar. To move at a deliberative pace, not too quickly, not too slow either, but that's my intent. Welcome any feedback on that. We'll seek to find time, and we'll post a public meeting notice per usual rules as soon as we can. Okay? Thank you, everybody. Thanks to the members of the public for participating. We appreciate it, and without objection, we're adjourned.